to go ahead and go live, and you can tell about your family business. That's a good introduction.
I get my tea.
You can get the tea. You can get your tea when Bill live, and you can tell about your family. Sorry about that. I always forget to do that. Anyhow, Sean. Oh, Dan's grinding us. That's a surprise. Dan? Oh, well, Sean, you were explaining that you had a 3-generation business which was wiped out.
Yeah, well, it wasn't my family's business. It was in the neighborhood. It was a dry cleaning family. They owned the dry cleaners. And it was literally, I could look out the window and see it, But I could take the hat there and get it cleaned and reshaped, but they closed down. So I can't take it there anymore. And I don't want to send it out to some stranger, because you send the hat out to take it some dry cleaning place. Every place now they send, there's some main warehouse someplace and people have dry cleaners, but it's not a real dry cleaner. You know what I mean? It's a front. No. So yeah, like it's a front. You bring your stuff there and they'll send it out to another place. It's sad because it was nice. I could take my hat right down, one street away. I could take it, give it to the dry cleaner. They could clean the hat, reshape it, and I'd get it back, But anyway, they closed down.
Everything's changing. What was their story? Were they white people, or what were they?
Yeah, they were white people, good family, and it just got put out of business, because they couldn't compete with people don't dress up anymore. So a lot of people just don't wear clothes that require dry cleaning, like people don't like wearing suits to work or anything like that. They don't have to. So that's one part. Society changed. People stopped wearing suits and dresses and started wearing t-shirts like I'm wearing. But the other part is the dry cleaners that kind of put them out of business are not are not like a family run business. They're dry cleaning chains where it's really just like a place where you drop your dry cleaning off and then they load everything to a big truck and take it to wherever. And some warehouse that has a bunch of people that dry clean stuff from all of their chain outlets, and then they bring it back and deliver them. And then you have delivery issues because sometimes they deliver your shirt to like the wrong dry cleaning outlet, stuff like that, so you never had those problems before. Family businesses were in a small community were just so much better. And economy of scale is not good for society. It's good for the economy, but it's not good for society. Economy of scale is highly overrated.
I kind of think so too. I mean, that personal touch is valuable. And anyhow, so in your neighborhood, have other businesses come and gone?
Yeah, right. A block away. I live in a really small neighborhood, right? Like you could throw a tennis ball from one end of the town, and if you had good enough arm, you might be able to bounce it out the other end, But also a block away is the location of the house of the family that used to have the garbage contract. And it was the same family got the garbage contract every year, right? It was just the way it was, right? It was their contract. And, sometimes people will complain, how come, cahoots, because, this one guy, his family's always going to have the garbage contract, right? We don't have competition. But the garbage was always picked up, and now, his kids went off to college and stuff. They're school teachers. They live in different states. They don't want to run a garbage. They're gone. That's long since gone. Nobody wanted the business, right? So he just stopped doing it. And I guess I don't know if he's even alive anymore. I don't think they live there anymore. But so now garbage is contracted out. We're to the lowest bidder, and they have to go through a ridiculous process, and these anti-corruption zealots will make sure we get the best deal. And there's garbage on the street every time they pick up the garbage, and that's been that way for probably like a decade now, ever since when the garbage was picked up by the family who always had the contract and they were your neighbor. They didn't leave garbage laying on the street, and it's just all that.
Their neighbors, would they?
No, and all of that's gone. So now, just like dry cleaning is a chain, the garbage collection is a chain. There's companies that they're nothing but garbage companies. That's what they do, and they have people who do nothing but place bids in different municipalities to get the contract. And if they get the contract, and they send a team to your community to pick up the garbage, but they don't care. They do a lousy job. I mean, if they don't, there's only so much work they're willing to do, and if you don't like it, tough, then we won't pick up your garbage for you. We'll raise the price. It's just, it was a lot better when it was a small family business, and the guy who picked up the trash lived down the street, because if he saw trash blowing down the street, he'd go yell at one of his employees, "Why is there trash blowing down the street?" That's all gone. A dry cleaner too. You don't have to worry about your stuff getting sent to the wrong dry cleaning outlet, because they're your neighbor. They weren't going to mess it up. Even if they didn't write your name on the shirt, they wouldn't mess it up. What happened to the other guy, Dan?
I don't know, but this is Seed Sue.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
No problem. We were talking.
I want to get a cup of tea. I'll be right back.
Minor issues like the destruction of small businesses throughout America.
All right.
But I've got a question for you.
Okay.
What is holy today?
What is holy today?
Yes.
I don't know. Water, holy water. I don't know what.
When I was scheduling this conference a few minutes ago, Google told me that today was holy. Google told me that today was holy, HOLI, and I'm shocked. I'm absolutely shocked that you don't know it, because today is the Hindu Festival of Colors.
Oh, yeah.
And you, as a white nationalist and the author of the Pace Amendment, you should know about colors.
That's right. And I bet you they don't say a holy day for a Christian holiday, but that's life.
With the throwing of colored powder and water balloons, Holi has become known as India's most vivid, joyous festival. Are you feeling a sense of joy today?
That's right, but I wonder, does the word holy come from that language? I don't know.
I strongly doubt it.
Okay.
It's just, I just kind of blown away. Actually, let's see, it may say here, although Hindu festival colors is probably related to the word cow, which is sort of masking or something.
Oh, I see.
The Hindu Festival of Colors finds its origins in South Asia. Oh, those are the dark ones. Those are the dark ones.
Well, if they're going to start doing that and celebrating every holiday that's out there, they're going to be overlapping every day of the year with many different ones. When they start announcing this is the cargo cult holy day, then they've reached the bottom of the pile. Do you guys know what the cargo cult is?
There's more than one. I mean, they're sort of unique from island to island, as I understand it. But Sean, you've never heard of this?
No, I thought it was a joke.
No. In World War II. Well, Bill, you tell it, and I'll.
Well, no. You have a vaster wealth of knowledge than I do, but I just thought it was a really interesting religion. It shows how religions can begin. You go ahead and tell the story.
During World War II, the United States went island hopping. We all know that, right? That in the Pacific Ocean, the method basically was to go island to island, taking back the Pacific from the Japanese. And every time we took a new island, we had to land a whole lot of equipment there, and typically, in about 99.9% of the occasions, none of the native peoples who lived on these islands had ever seen anything like the stuff that we were downloading in these, Micronesian islands and Melanesian islands.
Is this where the islanders built like a model of an airplane out of like bamboo or something like
Yes,
that? Because
what happened was, of course, luckily for the world, but sadly for these Micronesian and Melanesian islanders, the war came to an end, and John from America, which is how some of the cargo cult gods came to be known, John from America suddenly disappeared. And John from America wasn't bringing his cargo anymore. And so they'd start praying for the return of cargo. Because, of course, every time a ship came in, the John from America would announce, "This is the latest cargo. We need some help. We need some help unloading the cargo." And wow, the natives got to taste some of the cargo, and you wear some of the cargo, and build their houses with some of the cargo, and just be entertained by some of the cargo.
And so that really shows how religion can begin, because an event happened and they want it to happen again. And so they seek supernatural guidance to be able to have that to be repeated. And so I think that shows the origin of certain religions.
Well, actually, it is amazing, because there's a whole field of anthropology, actually, that studies what are called revitalization movements. And cargo cults are considered like the archetypal example of revitalization movements, where a culture will basically totally reinvent itself to accommodate something that they've never seen before. And so, I mean, in the past, it might have been like they see a comet, and they realize that their grandfathers saw the same comet, which we might call Halley's Comet or something. And all of a sudden, they have to reinterpret their understanding of the stars. And sometimes something weird might wash up on the beach. But, when it's tons and tons and tons of cargo that is exotic and, by the way, very useful, very useful, very entertaining, very comfortable. Wow, you got to get more of that. You can't.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how we now examined the establishment of all of these cargoes and putting all of the things in, but I've recently been involved in taking all the stuff out. Where I represented a long time ago a Tahitian bottler by the name of Fourcade, which made a lot of alcohol. It turns out it was the biggest brewery in Tahiti. And as a result, I mentioned to a German guy, and mentioned that. And so he hired me. He was a German from Tahiti. And what his job was France had established all sorts of barracks and island camp, bivouacs in all of these remote islands, and they would build these buildings with asbestos in them when they built them just after World War II. And so they had to go through and return the islands to their natural state. And there were no natives that could do the asbestos removal. And when he found out that I represented Fourcade, he said, "Well, I wanted to hire you." So what he did was he went to all of these little islands where they'd established old bivouacs and barracks, and he had to remove all of the asbestos in there. And so what brought to my mind is you had to have German technology to do this. You couldn't rely on natives, or you couldn't even rely on the French, probably. They had to bring the Germans in to do it. So they were removing all of the last vestiges that had turned into a cargo cult for these guys.
Oh, I mean, were they upset by it? I mean, you can't take our gods. You're taking away our temples. I mean,
Well,
did
actually,
you get any resistance like that?
I think it was kind of like what they did with the Bikini Atoll for the hydrogen bomb, which my mother was involved in. She was involved in the hydrogen bombing of the Bikini Atolls. Well, that's what they did.
Bill, are you there?
What the French did. Oh, can you not hear me?
Hey, Bill.
Yeah. Hello. Am I?
Sean, can you hear?
I can hear. Can you hear me?
I can hear. Can you hear me? Okay.
I guess Charles is locked up. It's
Okay.
in here. So I guess you could keep going.
All right. But what would happen was they would remove all of the native islanders out of there, just get them out of there and turn it into their little barracks for whatever they did out in there in the Pacific Islands. So I don't know whether the people were relocated to those little islands, but they had to remove all the asbestos structures.
Did you all lose connection for a minute? Because
no, it was only you were gone for a moment, and we sure did backbite about you for the last minute and a half.
You said that I was the target of a cargo cult.
That's right. So as I was just saying, that my mom was involved in the Bikini Atoll hydrogen bomb testing, and what they did there is, and I don't know why they did it, they removed all the natives before they bombed the Bikini Atolls. And so this is what the French did also. They got all the natives out of there before they did all of their maneuvering in these little native atolls.
Oh, wow.
Is India wrong for maintaining that one island, allowing it to be isolated where like the natives still live there and they're still cannibals and they just kill them?
Like the North Seychelles Island. I think that's the coolest island that exists. In fact, I think maybe half Korean, half white Christian missionary should try to go there and see if he can convert them. That might be a good effort to have him try to do that.
He did. Wasn't one killed?
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
What do you know? Okay.
Where is this? I don't even know the story. What are we talking about?
Okay, Sean, you tell the story.
Okay. In India, there's an island that falls under their political control. I guess it's within 20 miles of their waters. And they're like William said, there was the guy who just got killed about a year or two ago, going there trying to teach them Christianity. You're not familiar with the island. They still practice cannibalism, I think, and they still kill people with bows and arrows and stuff. They're isolated.
It's the North Seychelles Islands. It's completely isolated, and it's been self-maintained for 20,000 years. The same people that went and settled the Australia and Tasmania, they're these Aborigines that it turns out they're of Asian origin, but they're very dark and black, and they're kind of like the little Negritos of the Philippines and these other islands. And they've basically been reborn every generation. The same genes are reborn every generation for 40,000 years because they're isolated. There's only about a few thousand people, maybe 1,000 people that live on the island, and they're completely self-sustained. They've never been conquered. About maybe in the early 1900s, an anthropologist went there and got a couple of people, and they brought them back to Australia or wherever, and did some testing on them, and they took them back. That's the only outside contact. And they don't have any technology. They're Stone Age. But if there's something washes up on the shore, they will use it. Like they do have bows and arrows, and the arrowheads are, they will pound like metal and that is washed up and make arrowheads out of them. But a few years ago, there was a major tsunami that washed over the islands, and they wanted to see if any of them survived. Well, sure enough of them survived that they continued on. And if you try to go there, they will kill you. And recently, a half Korean, half white guy said, I'm going to go convert them to Christianity. So he got in there, he landed on the island, and they ate him. And well, I don't know if they ate him, but they killed him. And then India decided that these people have never been conquered. It's their own country. We're not going to go in there. We're going to leave them alone. So.
I'm showing this thing on. Can you all see this on share screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this the right one?
I think
Yeah,
so. It looks like it.
I think so. Yeah, I've been there in a few years, so sure. Looks like it to me. I haven't tried to convert them in a while, but it's the coolest island out there. I would really like for maybe Hunter Biden to move there, or Joe Biden even. I think they should go there.
What's the name of the Undersecretary of Health and Human Services?
Oh, that's right, Fauci. I'd like Fauci to go there.
Well, this is amazing. I guess I've heard of the name Sentinel Islands, but I mean, now the Latter-day Saints, they wouldn't send like a pair of people there and maybe be armed or something.
Yeah, I think not. I think we just leave them alone. But I think maybe we have, who's this Daniel Christian that we've got on board?
Dan, have you've met Bill Johnson before, haven't you? You want to talk to Bill Johnson, do you? Dan, are you there?
I guess he's not.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Dan, okay, are you there?
I think I'm there.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I've met Bill.
Yeah. How you doing?
You certainly met Sean.
Yes.
Dan is from the Rob country. He's from Northwest Arkansas.
Oh, good for him.
Well, for now.
Yeah.
Mexico is looking better every day. Trust me.
Well, that's a first.
It's not a first, not if you've been talking to Charles.
Okay. What does that mean?
Well,
I like Mexico. That's all it means. I've spent a lot of my life in Mexico, and at least in my experience, Mexico preserves a lot more freedom than the United States does.
Well, there was a white nationalist many years ago. His name was Beam, I think his name was, and he went and he moved to Mexico. And this was during the sedition trials of the 1980s, where they went after Pastor Richard Butler and a bunch of others. And Louis Beam. He was down there with his wife living in Mexico, and they came to arrest him. And the federales didn't announce that they were federales, and so Louis Beam's wife shot them all up, killed a couple of them. And they said, and they were white nationalists, and they let her go. They said, well, the federales should have announced themselves who they were. And so at that time, I thought, hey, Mexico's got it together in many respects. However, one of my kids went to Mexico just recently with a bunch of friends, and they took a neighbor's car, and this neighbor drove. And he just come from a shooting range, and he still had ammunition in the back of his car. And so they got in there, and they got on the other side, and they went through the trunk, and they found the ammunition. So they arrested all these cute little girls, everybody. And the owner of the car had to bribe the federales, or I guess maybe it was local police, $12,000 a piece to get them all out. So he ponied up $50,000 to get these kids out of jail, or they'd still be there. So it's a schizophrenic country. They won't arrest white nationalists, but they'll keep little co-ed girls in jail until you pony up $12,000 a piece.
Bill, let's be real. Who would you rather be around? A bunch of white nationalists or some cute girls? I mean, let's think about it from the standpoint of the arresting parties.
And there you go.
I wonder what that would have cost fighting the system here in the United States. 50,000, that is a lot of money. I mean, usually you hear about bribes, for, I don't know, $100, $50, $200, but
it was $12,000 a piece. But that's a good point.
And maybe those were narcos that were, in charge of bribing.
Yeah. If the Mexican federales were in charge of January 6th, and all you had to pay was $12,000 to get out of that thing, and I'd rather have the federales surrounding DC than who we had. So maybe that's true.
Oh, I mean, think about it. I mean, if you're arrested on a gun charge in the United States, you won't get out for $12,000. You can count on an initial retainer of at least $25,000-$30,000. And it could go way higher than that.
Yeah.
Not to mention how long it's being prolonged, and you're waiting for resolve and solution and resolution, and there it's done.
Yeah, but
And then
see,
you
I've got a lot of relatives and short tail relatives in Mexico. When the United States banned polygamy, a whole bunch of Mormons took off to the south of the border. Some went to Canada, and some went to the two colonies in Mexico. And my groups were with Mitt Romney's great grandparents, I guess. And I still have some relatives, I guess short tail relatives down there. But I also read recently, a couple of years ago, that in retaliation, they some of the druggies killed a whole bunch of beautiful white families. I mean, a couple of white families with all the kids, because they didn't like the way that the Mormons were treating them. And so you got to be really careful down there.
Yeah.
I did have, but one thing you guys got to realize that these two Mormon colonies are just absolutely beautiful. You go in there and it looks like you're in Utah. You've got apple trees, orchards, and all nicely manicured lawns, and it's just beautiful. You got little white children just playing in the streets with a lot of little kids. It's really an ideal situation. And some of my relatives, I didn't go at this time, but one of them told me, because one of my sisters-in-law says, we were traveling down into Mexico, and it was just a terrible, gross place, and we come to this absolute island of just beauty. It wasn't an island, but of these Mormon colonies. And one turned to the other, says, see what the gospel does. It just makes it so wonderful. And my sister-in-law thought, it ain't the gospel. It's good. Everybody's white. They're all Anglo-Saxons that are doing that. And it was just, it just went over the heads of all of these really religious type. Well, of course, I'm really a religious type, but it went over their heads thinking it was the gospel of Jesus Christ that did it, instead of it was the Aryan Anglo-Saxon genes that did it. So I blather on.
It's kind of fascinating. I mean, in studying Mexican history, basically there was a 4-year period when that transformation almost took over, or maybe a 5-year period when that transformation almost took over all of Mexico, 1862 to 1867. And the amazing thing about it is that some of the best scientific literature anywhere in the world in that time, that 5-year time period, came out of Mexico, because you had.
Well, I'm sorry. Let me stop. What do you mean that transition almost occurred? I don't understand. What are you talking about? Is this Pancho Villa? Or
This is Pancho Villa is 1912, 1910. No. This is when the Habsburgs and the Bonapartes jointly took over Mexico.
Oh, yeah. That's right. There was a Napoleon's nephew or something was the emperor of Mexico for a while.
No, it was a Habsburg. It was a member of the Habsburg family.
Okay.
Maximilian Habsburg. But no, Napoleon's nephew was emperor of France at that moment, and basically the United States got itself into this little kerfuffle, which some people call the Civil War, and others call the war between the states, and still others call the War of Northern Aggression. But Maximilian came in, and he basically brought beauty into Mexico. And a lot of people compare the layout of Mexico City to Paris. And it wasn't Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna who made it that way. It wasn't Porfirio Diaz who made it that way. It certainly wasn't Pancho Villa. It was Maximilian. And basically, in this 5-year period, you see this, basically, it wasn't a renaissance, because there really hadn't been anything like that before in Mexico, but it was basically an explosion of culture, and they started building railroads, and to his credit, Porfirio Diaz did maintain a lot of that, but it's really amazing. Mexico is an incredibly rich country, and I mean, there are all these wonderful resources that it has, and you know, we had the opportunity to make it part of the United States in 1847 when Robert E. Lee. I love this image. Robert E. Lee set up his office in Chapultepec Castle on the west edge of Mexico City.
Well, now, okay. Well, now what about this, like the Spanish-American War? Was that like around that same time? Or is that, and like charge up San Juan Hill, or is that Puerto Rico?
That was Puerto Rico. And
okay.
that was a disgusting little war because that was, we just, I mean, we gave up the big prize there. The big prize was Cuba. I mean, I'll never quite understand why we gave up Cuba and kept Puerto Rico. It doesn't make sense, but you know, think how different the Caribbean would be today if Cuba were like Florida instead of basically kind of like a dagger pointed at the heart of the.
Or like what Florida was during Elvis Presley's clam bake movie era.
Or think of how much worse Mexico would be if the U.S. did have it.
Yeah, could be. Well, now what about, you know, that phrase message to Garcia? You guys know, familiar with that phrase? Was that like around that same time?
I don't know what you're talking about there.
The message to Garcia, that was some that's where you get the solution, you solve the problem no matter what it takes. And it's one of the presidents wanted to get a message to Garcia. And so he gave somebody a message, get the message to Garcia. And that phrase, we used to use it in my family growing up, take a message to Garcia. And you can look it up, see what that is. But that's somewhere, you know, south of Seattle that took place.
Who's Elbert Hubbard?
Elbert Hubbard. Is that the guy that wrote LA Confidential?
A Message to Garcia is a book by Elbert Hubbard.
It's from a phrase.
A Message to Garcia is a widely distributed essay written by Elbert Hubbard in 1899, expressing the value of individual initiative and conscientiousness in the world.
So this guy, I guess he memorialized it. This guy took a message from the president to Garcia, and he succeeded. He had to go through all sorts of jungles. Had to go past.
This doesn't relate to the Spanish-American War. A Message to Garcia is a widely distributed essay written by Elbert Hubbard in 1899, expressing the value of individual it as its primary example. The essay uses a dramatized version of a daring escapade performed by an American soldier, Lieutenant Andrew S. Rowan, I'm not sure, just prior to the Spanish-American War. The essay describes Rowan carrying a message from President William McKinley to General Calixto Garcia, a leader of the Cuban insurgents, somewhere in the mountain vastness of Cuba, no one knew where. The essay contrasts Rowan's self-driven efforts against the imbecility of the average man, the inability or unwillingness to concentrate on a thing and doing it. The point I wish to make is this. There's a quote. The point I wish to make is this. McKinley gave Rowan a letter to be hand-delivered to Garcia. Rowan took the letter and did not ask, where is he at? By the eternal, there is a man whose form should be cast in deathless bronze and the statue placed in every college of the land. It is not a book learning young men need. It is not book learning young men need, nor instruction about this and that, but a stiffening of the vertebrae, which will cause them to be loyal to a trust, to act promptly, concentrate their energies, and do the thing. Carry a message to Garcia.
Okay, thanks for saying. Because see that I grew up learning that. Two things: take a message to Garcia, which was one phrase that we used a lot, and the other was whate'er thou art, act well thy part. And that, I guess, probably comes from maybe the Mormon prophet David O. McKay. But that means that whatever you do, whatever you are, do the best you can. And those two phrases stuck in my mind. One is, I guess, from Scotland. The other one's has to do with Cuba. So there you go.
I don't know. I mean, Dan brings up an interesting question. How would history have been different if Mexico had been annexed into the United States? Would we be the same mess we are, or would manifest destiny have become real? I mean, have you ever thought? I mean, you wrote the Pace Amendment.
Yeah.
Is the Pace Amendment related at all to the concept of manifest destiny?
Well, I think so. Basically, it was the concept of a white ethno state. It wanted, James K. Polk had that promulgated manifest destiny, take America from the East Coast all the way to California. But then I guess the Pace Amendment took it one step farther, saying, let's have everybody between those two shores white. And I think that if you included Mexico, I mean, Mexico is a part of much of America right now through its immigration policies, or America's immigration policies. So I don't know. I think that whatever happens, it's maybe it's the same thing. Whether we had Mexico then or Mexico has us now, the result is the same unless we have something like the Pace Amendment.
Suppose we end up going to, this war drags on. We find ourselves in World War III, and the United States institutes a draft of able-bodied men and women between a certain age, and we don't care if you're an illegal immigrant or not. And we actually started to conscript the illegal immigrants. How many people from Central America and South America do you think would pour southward from the United States back down into Mexico?
I don't know, but what I think the way the tenor of America is now is they won't draft the illegal aliens. They only draft white males, and it'll be further devastation of the white race. So we can't be involved in a brothers' war, and we just can't. We got to stop this warmongering. I think America has been the biggest warmonger for my entire lifetime and before, and that's got to stop.
How are we going to get out of it? Because I think it's very, very likely that we end up. I mean, clearly we're on the ground now. We were on the ground from the beginning. We have covert people doing stuff on the ground, and it's only a matter of time before a couple of Americans are captured and the cover that they're just there on their own accord falls apart, and we find out they're really there because they're part of a military unit or some other government agency. And China is going to go after Taiwan at some point, So, North Korea might take advantage of this and lob something that comes in from outer space and this time strikes the surface of the earth, because it did. North Korea did the same thing about 10 years ago, right? I mean, there was a satellite or something that came in over the United States. That was really a message to us to let us know that they could reach us. So, we're probably going to be in this thing in a greater capacity than we are in the next 12 months or something, or 2 years, because both sides in Washington, Democrats and Republicans, they're waiting for a Pearl Harbor moment. They're pushing this. They want some Pearl Harbor action that's going to require that we get involved. So, I mean, how are we going to deal with that? Because as a veteran myself, I don't want to go back and fight. And I think it's very unfair that I would be called on, even at my old age in my 50s, I'll be called upon because we'll just be desperate. And, all these able-bodied young illegal immigrants won't be touched, So how are we going to?
You're a Columbia graduate, you'll be at the top of the list.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you had during World War II, you had Charles Lindbergh that went around the country. Everything he said fell not only on deaf ears, but he was loathed and he was hated because of his stand to try to keep America out of the war. Then when we were kids, you had Eugene McCarthy go around and try to stop the Vietnam War, and it fell on deaf ears. And these were from two different wings of the same bird of prey. You had ultra-leftist Eugene McCarthy didn't want to go to war, and Lyndon Baines Johnson ignored him. And then you had Lindbergh didn't want to go to war, and Wilson. No, I guess that's wasn't Wilson. Roosevelt rejected him, and then in World War I, when you had Wilson going to war, you had William Jennings Bryan resigned as Secretary of State because he didn't want to go to war. So we have the hawks of every party win out, and the doves lose. That's the way it's been in America. So I don't know.
There's something that I want to ask you about in a second, but before Dan has been very silent back there, and I want to ask him a question. He's got 2 teenage daughters, and I'm just wondering how are the teenagers reacting to the war, and are they discussing it in the school, or are they oblivious because it's the opposite side of the world? I mean, what is the culture right now?
It's kind of hard. I don't know. My one daughter was home all day today. She chose not to watch the news because I usually have it on. For some reason, we got a notice this morning real early that the bus was not going to run, and it was convenient for her to just do school from home. But no, I asked them that, and I don't really get too many answers. It kind of seems like business and education as usual.
So there's no awareness. I mean, this is interesting.
Well, and you have to keep in mind, at least I assume, now my wife just got home and she's a teacher, but I have to assume that they avoid anything that can be construed to be political. They avoid it like the plague.
Well, boy, when I was in high school, there were protests up and down my school trying to stop the war in Vietnam. And I was so stupid. I hate to admit this there, but I was, oh, we gotta support the war. And I was all for it, and I didn't realize how stupid that was until a lot later. But we had a lot of protests against the Vietnam War. And
there was awareness because they were telling parents and they were telling kids, the boys who are over in Vietnam War right now, they were in junior high when this war started.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was a lot of effort to make people aware. So, I mean, that is a fascinating thing about the change in culture. I mean, whether we like the transformation of the 60s or not, I think it's historically true that parents and teachers used to be very concerned about, making their kids aware of what was going on in the world today. And
yeah, but now now there's different agenda. Now they support, homosexual rights, and they're opposed to free speech for someone who promotes, traditional American principles.
Or as much as I'd like to believe my daughters are conservatives, I know my youngest spoke up one time about, I guess she didn't like the Trump administration because it was about destroying the environment, in the name of oil and pipelines and energy. And my only really response was, somebody sent me a little, 5-minute video from Prager University. And it just basically talks about the carbon footprint, how large the carbon footprint is with the production of batteries and everything in the wake of solar power, windmills, all of that stuff, electric cars, the carbon footprint. We don't hear anything about that.
The funny thing is, things like batteries are really, the process of creating batteries is so much more ecologically disastrous than anything.
But we don't hear anything about that.
Right. But again, when I was growing up, there was a real disconnect with some of these issues, and they were schizophrenic in many respects. I was the first Earth Day was in 1970, and Eugene, Oregon was one of the biggest cities to promote Earth Day, and I was the assistant leader for setting up Earth Day in 1970. And we had a bunch of supporters, and it was very much pro-environment, supportive of that. But then when that project finished, the next project that we had to do in the class was whether cigarettes should be banned from advertisement on TV and on magazines and on TV, I guess on TV. And all these people that were supporting the environment, they all they smoked cigarettes. And I was the only one in the room. I was in a group, but I wanted to ban cigarette advertisements on TV. And I was the only one there. And everyone was that way. So they were supporting Earth Day, and they were kind of and I say was assistant leader is because my brother, who was student body president at the time, he was in charge of it. And so he picked me as his assistant. But it was just strange that all of these were for cigarette smoking, yet they want to save the environment. So they were activists, but they were schizophrenic.
How long do you think it is before the United States breaks apart? At least
16 months.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds crazy, but I really think in our lifetimes, we'll see the national border of the United States change. I've been saying that for about 10 years. And there was a local radio talk show host in Pennsylvania, and they don't let me call and talk anymore, and they don't publish anything I write to the newspapers. I'm banned. I'm censored. But I wrote an article once, a letter to the editor. I don't get to write articles. I'm a nobody. I wrote a letter to the editor one time saying that basically what I just said here is that I think we'll see the borders in the United States change. And I would call in. I talked to this guy, and we became friends over the years. He's passed away now, but I said, it is unrealistic that an empire will last for 300 years without changing its borders. I said the United States has changed its national borders several times in its existence. It's only because, the Cold War was kind of an anomaly. Hawaii didn't become a state until after 1900. I don't remember when, but
1958.
58?
Or not, I don't know. I was in kindergarten, and we had a what was it called, an assembly, and we talked about it. It had happened.
Well, and of course, the Hawaiians believe that they were annexed illegally, and they're fighting for their independence.
Yeah, and they added an apostrophe in between the two I's too. As that was done in the last 10 years.
But basically, I mean, I'm totally in favor of Hawaiian secessionism. It would help in so many ways if Hawaii would secede, because it would show that it would justify secession, among other things.
Yeah.
Hawaii is also, I mean, have any of you ever spent any time in Hawaii?
Never.
Yeah, I went to college there.
You went to college there. I didn't know that.
Yeah, when I was 17, I didn't want to go to college, and my dad said, "Well, why don't you go to Hawaii to college?" Great. So I went to Hawaii to college when I was,
I mean, that was in the 60s, I guess.
No, it was 1972 is when I was in Hawaii.
So did you then transfer to Brigham Young or something? Or
yeah. I graduated from Brigham Young. I wasted probably a year and a half in Hawaii. It was stupid. I went there.
Do you remember the only totally legal racial slur in the United States? No one would ever be arrested for using it.
I know the Howley. I don't know.
Yeah, Howley. You're a Howley man.
Yeah. Well, and I was there. When I went there, there was all sorts of anti-white sentiments, and the Maoris. I remember there, the Maoris would say how evil the white man was because they just oppressed us from New Zealand, and I was so sympathetic. Oh, why did the white people do that? And then the Tongans would say, or the Samoans would say, yeah, the white people came over, they took over Pongo, and they was da da da. And I was just so sympathetic to them, and I wasn't, wasn't until a few years later when I got older and I realized it's all a bunch of bunk. The white people have done good for everybody, and they would scalp us and eat us if they could.
How did Maori end up they went to the University of Hawaii or something?
No, I went to a college called the Church College of Hawaii, and it was primarily for the Polynesians, but of course the Chinese came in, and a white guy wanted to go there, and so they allowed me to go there. So I went there, and I was around all sorts of mostly Samoans and Tongans and other people that couldn't read and write, never could. And I spent a year and a half there. It was stupid.
That's a very interesting experience.
Yeah.
But don't you think though that it'll be one of the Eastern, maybe one of the original colonies that tries to separate in the coming, say, decades? I find it very hard to believe the United States makes it to the next century without the borders changing substantially. And I was thinking that perhaps the way it could happen is a country like North Korea fires on the United States, strikes Midland, USA, and the White House wants to do nothing about it, doesn't want to respond. So a state governor decides, well, I'm not going to sit here idly. And in order for a governor to use the National Guard to respond, you would have to secede from the Union. Something like that. You think anything like that's even remotely possible?
No, what I think is going to happen, I don't think that's possible. What's going to happen, this is more likely scenario. In 2020, whenever Donald Trump is going to get elected again, and he's going to start cleaning house this time. He's going to put someone in charge of the FBI and says, okay, the FBI, you worked against me the entire time. We're going to do away with the FBI. And then he's going to, and then he's going to come up with other party, other groups, other, what's it called, departments, start doing away with that. And there's going to be a big protest. There's going to be fighting within Congress, and it's all going to dissolve because Donald Trump finally is going to take his shoe off and pound it on the table like Khrushchev and says, we're going to bury the deep state. And then that's going to cause everything to break up. And then the white people will finally realize that we have to have our own country again. And then it'll be like the city of Enoch, where everybody will just live in peace and harmony for the next several generations.
Well, that's interesting.
I think,
Sean, in terms of what you said, I mean, does anybody remember? I don't know if you all used to read Time magazine. I don't read it anymore, but I used to be an avid reader of it. And sometime in the 1980s, they had a cover story called Our Disappearing Border. And this was way before NAFTA was adopted. And it was basically a prediction that the United States and Mexico would merge.
Well, we're pretty much gotten there, at least in the Southwest. That's pretty much much what's happened. But
if the United States and Mexico merged, I think it would be the Democrats would be very surprised at how conservative that part of the country would go. I think if the United States and Mexico merged, you might see Texas, Mexico, California actually go very conservative politically, because the Spanish Empire was not a liberal empire.
Well, I mean, Mexico is a largely Christian country. The people in Mexico, I mean, we should probably do a show on the narcos at one point, because they do not represent the Mexican people. I mean,
I'm sorry, what's narco?
The narcotraficantes, the drug dealers,
okay.
the people you were talking about a few minutes ago.
The one that killed all the white people. Okay, I got to learn what they're called.
Right. I mean, my suspicion is that, I mean, and a lot of Mexicans believe this too. Dan may want to comment on it. Is that they are sponsored in large part by the CIA, perhaps entirely by the CIA, to create this trouble along the border, and to create the instability that the drug war is causing in both countries. Dan, do you have any thoughts on that? Not at all.
Oh, okay. You guys, this has been most productive. In Japanese, you have a term called zuihitsu, which means follow the pin. So it's kind of stream of consciousness. You just go wherever your pin, whatever you want to say, you just write it out there and you go that way. This is what this discussion has been today. We've just jumped all over the place because we've been following the pin. But I'm going to have to go because I've got a 4:00 meeting. So
I want to put a seed in your mind, something we can talk about next time. How familiar are you with California Government Code 1027.5?
Oh, I have it memorized. I know exactly what you're talking about, but it slipped my mind right now. So what is it?
It's a 1953 addition to the government code. Are you all seeing it right now?
Yes.
It talks about the world communist conspiracy. And it talks about it in such detail and how it's going to operate and how it's going to infiltrate the schools and every profession and the government. I'm sure that you all have heard this idea that some people say that 1984, Orwell's 1984 was not a warning, it was a guidebook. And it occurs to me that this statute is like a guidebook for how, because I mean, to my mind, California is basically the most communistic state in the union right now. I don't know how you can stay there. Dan ran away and moved to Northwest Arkansas, and you know, I used to love California, and one of the objectives of the World Communist Movement is to place its members in state and local government's position in state-supported state-supported educational institutions. If this objective is successful, propaganda can be disseminated by the members of these organizations among the citizens and pupils and students, and those members who would have the opportunity to teach them, and to whom, as teachers, they would look for guidance, authority, and leadership. It's all happened.
Yeah.
And I just was wondering if you could, given your position, if you could find out anything about this.
That's interesting. Let's talk about that next time.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I gotta go. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for joining us. Dan, you've got to turn, because I've got a question for you. What is holy about today?
Well, I don't, other than the fact that God gave us this day to serve him and enjoy life. I don't know where, I didn't understand your email.
It was kind of ad hoc, because as I was setting up this meeting, I was telling Bill about it, and we didn't really get to discuss it, but we got on tangents of cargo cults and the Sentinel Islands cannibals and everything else. But today is holy because Holi is the great Hindu festival of colors. And I was just wondering what you had to say about the Hindu festival of colors.
Nothing.
Well, let's start off with this. Is it the sort of thing that Google should be telling us is the most important thing about today? Is it positive?
Okay, so you got this from Google, I take it.
It was flashed on the screen that today is holy, and HOLI, and having never heard of it before, of course, it basically hooked me in, and they're saying that this is one of the most important things going on in the country right now. The Hindu Festival of Colors. Holi has been celebrated in the Indian subcontinent for centuries, with poems documenting celebrations back to the 4th century of the Common Era. Nobody says AD anymore, do they? Ooh, that would be terrible to say Anno Domini. It marks the beginning of spring after a long winter, symbolic of the triumph of good over evil. It is celebrated in March, corresponding to the Hindu calendar month of Falguna. In 2020, Holi begins March 18th. So, I mean, I guess the interesting thing is, I'm just asking, what have we become? What kind of country are we these days?
Right.
I mean, what's your answer to that?
All-inclusive mishmash.
Holi has become increasingly popular outside of India, in large part because millions of Indians and other South Asians living all over the world As with Diwali, another Indian festival, communities with South Asian heritage living abroad often get together to celebrate Holi. I had never heard of it before in my life. And on the eve of the festival, large pyres are lit in many parts of India to signify the burning of evil spirits. People often throw wood, dried leaves, and twigs into the bonfires. It's just, it's like we are fed a constant barrage of distraction. And that was how Bill got on the subject of the cargo cults. When are they going to start, celebrating the holidays of John from America? When did John from America first appear on some island, and when did he disappear? It's an amazing thing. And
Sean's been awful quiet.
What do you say?
Sean has been awful quiet.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's not much to say about this holiday. It's just the day that they throw a bunch of pastel colors in the air and cover each other in pastel, right? That's what this is.
Well, don't you want to do that?
No, I always thought the Jehovah Witnesses did that. Didn't they somehow incorporate that into their religion? They somehow mix that in there.
I totally missed that if they did.
It's what my wife and I incorporate into our marriage with body paints.
I'm not sure I want to hear any more details about that at all. I somehow find this difficult to picture, but okay. Anyhow, well, Dan, what were your thoughts? We were talking about Mexico. What were your thoughts about all that?
Well, I'm very enamored by the articles I'm reading on Quora. I don't know how I got on the Quora list, but I get an article or two a day in my email. And I think it's powered by artificial intelligence. And Quora has articles written by people, from all walks of life on all topics. But somehow I read one on Mexico, and I get one or two a day now. And I could read one of them to you just so you get an idea.
Sure.
Okay, let me do this. I sent this one to another gal who ironically was visiting Tampico, my wife's town, and she's in the transportation industry, and it's just kind of a rare occurrence. But let's see if I can find that one, the last one here. And it's okay. Here's a guy who writes, whoops. Oh boy. Yeah, here we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
What's it like to live in Mexico compared to the United States? And Douglas Whiteside, he's born and raised in the US, permanent resident of Mexico since 2012. He answered this about 2 years ago. And he writes, the biggest differences are the cost of living and the weather. The cost of living in most places in Mexico is considerably lower than most places in the US, and the weather is much nicer. Most of Mexico is in the tropics, so it never gets cold, and a lot of the country is at higher elevation, so it never gets too hot. Politically, Mexico is more conservative or libertarian than the US, while there is government-funded healthcare that is available to anyone. There is not much of a social safety net otherwise. The effective tax rates are among the lowest of all OECD nations, and even where there are laws in place, they are often more like suggestions rather than vigorously enforced regulations.
Amen to that.
There is a much more relaxed vibe here in Mexico. People don't seem to be as hurried or stressed. They also are, generally speaking, more polite and generous than most Americans. And of course, Mexico is a Spanish-speaking country. Almost all business is conducted in Spanish. More and more Mexicans are bilingual now, particularly the younger generation, but still it would be difficult for someone to live here full-time with no Spanish skills. But there are a lot of similarities as well. The stores here have a lot of the same brands as stores in the US. Most of the country is in the central time zone, but Mexico has territory in the same 4 time zones as the continental US. The most popular auto makes are the same as in the US. The school year is roughly the same. That was one example. Let's see, what else?
I certainly agree with everything he says.
Here's one. As a Mexican, would you like to see somebody post these questions, and then just about anybody can respond. This guy, David, is a US-Mexico dual citizen and a history nut. Yep, that Mexican thing, he says. I'm a dual citizen. I've experienced both medical and dental systems as a patient. And I know American doctors, and I have Mexican doctors in my family. My conclusion, F the US healthcare system. Seriously, I'll take the Mexican system any day of the week and twice on Sundays. Oh, by the way, I told you, Charles, how that dentist down there over the holidays, when nobody's supposed to be open, opened his office on a Sunday to finish up my dental work because he knew we were leaving the next morning, Monday.
Yeah, you did tell me.
Yeah. And I'll flip the question on you. As an American, I would more than welcome the Mexican healthcare system in the United States. I'm not saying US doctors are bad. They're good professional people doing the best they can in a horrid system. However, if you're American getting healthcare in Mexico, you will notice A, doctors that spend time with you, listening instead of looking at their clock and using the nurse for most things. B, costs ranging from free to next to nothing. It's mixed public-private system. When the competition charges zero, even the fanciest private hospitals will find ways to charge less. Nobody gets bankrupt due to medical bills. And without millionaire malpractice insurance to pay for because of a less medically litigious environment, a Mexican medical doctor doesn't have to rack up prices to live in a nice lifestyle, nor leave their practice due to malpractice insurance, making it impossible to get by. There's another article. He says, see, OB/GYN shortage is going to get worse. He continues, note, Mexican doctors can study for mostly free in Mexico's public university system, and this includes for some scholarships abroad on the condition they practice at the public hospitals, and yes, they're paid at regular rates, or teach the subject locally if they go abroad to study a specialty for an equivalent number of years. Given this means they can leave after a few years with experience under their belt and no student loan, I'd also like to see the Mexican higher education private-public mix in the US, by the way. But many Mexican doctors have spent some time as an employee of the public system, even the fancy doctors that go into the highest rated private practices. This means they usually know people there. They can go into the public hospitals to confer with the public system doctors in the tougher cases and help oversee and know exactly how the system works, so people who need care by the best private physicians, say for cancer, can manage their costs better, but still see a top doctor. They've dealt with population of poor people as well as rich, and they know how to approach a multitude of customers, etc. I've never seen people from 2 different hospitals belonging to 2 different systems in the US communicating as effectively as I've seen it in Mexico. The thing the US seems not to understand is that it is cheaper overall to give people in the country free access to most basic care, and once the infrastructure is there to do it, might as well make the prices of everything else manageable. With some sort of universal health care in place, infectious diseases don't propagate as fast. Most children are vaccinated. There are a multitude of health problems in urban areas that get much, much worse and faster, often spread if the population is afraid they will go bankrupt if they seek care. From an epidemiological standpoint, it is beyond stupid not to have access to free basic care people can trust, to just go to when they feel ill, no matter what their income may be. And even on an individual standpoint, if people avoid the doctor due to cost, the consequences of that can be much, much more expensive, not to mention the productivity increase of a healthier overall workforce. As an economic decision, providing free or very low health care universally is a no-brainer, unless you ask the US Congress. Salmon Chertorivsky, at the time Mexico's Ministry of Health and architect of the latest universal care reforms to the Mexican healthcare system, said in 2012, Mexico devised and implemented a reform and then demonstrated with evidence how a large middle-income country can transform its health system and successfully achieve universal health coverage in 1 decade. Details can be found at Seguro Popular Health Coverage for All of Mexico at World Bank website. And Americans vote with their feet too. In their later years, more and more Americans are moving to Mexico permanently, citing affordable, high-quality healthcare as one of the top 4 reasons. And there's another article concerning that. End of article.
What is income tax like in Mexico?
My wife says it's very, very low. Claudia, what's income tax in Mexico? How much do you pay on your income?
I don't remember the percentage. It's very, very low.
She just doesn't remember the percentage. It was insignificant.
In other words, what it is it's basically the same rate as the United States had in the 1920s.
My mom pays 1,000 pesos.
What's 1,000 pesos? $150 her mom pays a year for property tax.
And that's
And they live in a, in the city, so to speak.
well, I mean, even with all I've been through, for example, I have been able to maintain ownership of 800 acres in the state of Yucatan. Ever since I lost my license and almost everything I had in Texas. Yeah, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? You can afford to live in, you can, and who was it that wrote that it was a conservative libertarian? I mean, oddly enough, I really agree with that too. And it's ironic because the greatest libertarian force in Mexico was called, it had this, well, it still exists, but it's called the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, the PRI. And you'd think that, and it was basically that they took that name basically right after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and they were basically trying to copy it. And so the name means the permanent institutionalized revolution. And yet what they did was very interesting. They effectively built a trade wall around the country. They, for the entire time of the PRI's dominance, they banned all foreign imports and most foreign investment. And they maintained their own economy in isolation to the degree that they could against the United States. And the only, because otherwise the United States would have taken it over economically when they didn't take it over politically. And the disaster for Mexico, really, to the degree that Mexico has changed a lot in the past 30 years over NAFTA, was because NAFTA broke down Mexican sovereignty, and it broke down the nationalistic impulse of the PRI. The PRI existed to prevent American domination, and we desperately need something like the PRI in America to preserve what's left of America. And no major party in America is doing anything like the PRI ever did. We need a wall built around our country that would encourage local manufacturing, national manufacturing. And the system that, now I know something about the system that they're describing, the medical care. There's a specific reason why Mexico can afford that. It didn't exist before about 1973. Okay, quick trivia quiz, everybody. What happened in 1973?
Claudia was born.
Vietnam ended it's 72, so that was right about the time Vietnam was ending. But
Vietnam ended in 74, the evacuation of Saigon. No. What happened in 73 was the Arab oil embargo. And suddenly, a rather minor aspect of the Mexican economy became a very major aspect of the Mexican economy. And the drilling in the Gulf of Campeche and in Veracruz blew up. I mean, it just skyrocketed in value and importance. And all of a sudden, Mexico had tremendous surplus because the Mexican government owned the oil company, and they'd owned it ever since the 1920s, Petróleos Mexicanos, Pemex. And what that meant was that Mexico all of a sudden was a very rich country, and they had a very, very far-sighted pair of, well, three presidents in a row, really. Gustavo Madero was in the 1960s. My favorite was Luis Alvarez Echeverria in the 1970s, the early 70s, and then in the late 70s, early 80s, they had Jose Lopez Portillo. And these three presidents, I mean, we could discuss the fact that those three presidents were all as white as we are, but that's a sort of separate issue. But Echeverria was particularly interesting because he went to the United Nations right during the Arab oil embargo, and he did what no American has ever done. He explained why the Arabs were angry at the United States. It was because basically the Arabs had been invaded and colonized and subjugated by the state of Israel. And he said that, Israel, he invented this phrase that I repeat so often, that Israel is the only successful National Socialist nation in the history of the world. And then when Mexico began to be rich under his administration due to the increasing price of oil, he didn't he didn't just build a bunch of fancy buildings in his name. He didn't just glorify himself as many Mexicans politicians in the past might have done. He actually invested every penny of this money from oil in building the Mexican medical system, and he built rural clinics all over the country. Rural electrification, sistemas de agua potable, meaning systems of drinkable water. He really built up the Mexican infrastructure in a spectacular way, but he did something else. At the same time that he was building up the Mexican medical system, he promoted birth control. And he made birth control available all over the country and promoted it. And, that meant that Mexico's health, the national health, could increase without a population explosion. And then we get to one of the interesting junctures in world history when Pope John Paul II, this was during Lopez Portillo's presidency, John Paul II came over to Mexico, and it was the first time a Roman Catholic Pope had ever visited Mexico. The common people worshipped him, literally. I mean, it was a big deal. I had old Indian women coming up to me and saying, "Eres Polaco? Are you Polish?" They were so entranced by the idea of this Pope who came to visit them. But what did he do? He advocated absolute abolition of birth control. He told them to go into the pharmacies and tear down these free stands that were the Mexican government had put in literally every stand with instructions and different options for birth control. And this is in 78, 79. And so what happened then? What happened then was what has transformed America, the way Bill Johnson was talking about. What happened then was basically the combination of the new health system, generously sponsored and carefully set up by Echeverria and Lopez Portillo, combined with no birth control, because the Pope said this is a terrible sin. There is no sin worse than birth control. And that is why the population of Mexico since that time has basically quadrupled. That is why there is a population explosion in Mexico that has forced Mexicans out of their own country and created basically a surplus population that was unimaginable even as late as 1978. And basically, I have always said I regard John Paul II as worse than any war criminal, because in the name of peace and love and God's law, he basically blew up the map of North America. And if California and Arizona and Texas and really Georgia and Florida too have been flooded with Latins, it is because of what he did to upset the very careful and very responsible programs that had been put in place. And I often think that it was a plan, that he knew exactly what he was doing, and that he wanted to use the population of Mexico, basically in Central America, to destroy America, to destroy the United States of America. And that has happened. Dan, what do you think? Am I right or am I crazy?
I don't know. I'd have to, think about that longer, harder, and more in depth. It's a lot of history.
How long until we break up, though? That's why I asked my question earlier. How long do you think it is before the borders in the United States change?
Well, I mean, it's hard to picture exactly what's going to happen. I go through this in my mind many times, and I reflect on the possibility of California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas joining Mexico. And that would be one possibility. But will the United States really let them go? Or maybe you remember in 2004 to 2005, they were talking about the North American Union. That was a Bush program, basically that Canada, the United States, and Mexico would merge, and there would, in parallel to the euro, there would be a one single currency called the Amero. Did y'all hear about that?
Oh,
yeah, I mean, vaguely, I remember the trade block concept. That's about like I graduated from my international affairs graduate degree in 2001, and that's about when that the Cold War fell apart in 1989, when I was in the Army, and then I got out of the Army and went to college and graduate school, both for international studies, and that was the whole idea of trade blocks and interdependence was going to make the world. We were never going to have wars because we were going to be intertwined so much. so dependent on each other that the risk of going to war would be so great because, you know, you wouldn't have your oil like we have now. And here we are in that situation, and we're suffering the consequences of the interdependence, but interdependence is not preventing the world from going to war with each other. You know, the idea is that, you know, Ukraine and Russia and the United States and Europe, we'd all get together and we just work something out. You know what I mean? Maybe Ukraine would give something up, but it would all been worked out. Nobody would risk firing any serious blows. But you know, I think that the United States is more likely to break up because of a military attack on U.S. soil, like Russia or China attack U.S. soil or North Korea attacks U.S. soil. I don't think we're all that far from that, and I'm kind of surprised that people aren't even thinking in those terms. Like, suppose a tactical nuke is man carried into the United States, or suppose North Korea just puts one on a rocket and it comes in and it goes off. Even if we shoot it down, it goes off over U.S. Territory. We're still going to be affected by it. You know, our televisions and stuff are going to go out.
Sean, just for curiosity's sake, for purpose of argument, why would that lead to the U.S. breaking up as opposed to bringing us together?
I don't think that this time around you're going to see the United States rallying behind a war cry. I mean, that's worked in the past, but it's not happening now. Like, we're looking at what's going on in Ukraine, and the United States is the American people are not rallying together with the desire to enlist and join and fight. And I don't think that a direct strike on U.S. soil, even with foreign forces landing on U.S. soil, is going to result in people wanting to run off and fight. I don't want to fight because, you know, I'm a veteran. And I never got, you know, I was supposed to get veterans priority on job placement services and job training, and I never got any of that. I have a bunch of student loans. The government's never done anything to help me get a good job, and it's falling all over itself every day to give money and resources to all these illegal immigrants pouring in. And my attitude is, you know, Chinese was the language I studied, and if I see the Chinese parachutes coming out, I'm just going to brush up on the Chinese. I have no reason to fight. Why do I care if Russia, China, let's say they strike the U.S. Is that war with me, or is that war with the U.S. government? Because the U.S. government doesn't do anything for me. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Why do I care if the U.S. government that does nothing for me and hurts me more than it helps me disappears? I mean, why do I care? And all they can say is, yeah, well, if we weren't here, you know, your life would be a lot worse. You know, you could end up, yeah. You know, if that's all it can offer me is that, you know, my life would be a lot worse. I don't know that my life would be a lot worse. You know, if the Chinese parachutes started opening up in the sky, I'm not so sure that my life would be much worse if Pennsylvania became a Chinese colony. You know, I don't think my life would be much worse.
Horrible thought. But anyway, I'm going to let you have the last word to respond to that, because I've got to go have dinner. What is your thought on all this?
Mine? Well,
What if there was a Chinese invasion of Arkansas? Would you fight?
I guess the thoughts that were going through my mind were, if I was a Ukrainian, I'd probably be fighting. And that's due to the leadership and the strong national spirit of those people. They're the most courageous people that I can remember or point a finger at. And it's been inspiring, and I wish that when Biden offered him a ride out, that Zelensky would have offered to change places, you know, because I just so much admire Zelensky's leadership, and I think Biden is just pathetic. Which takes me back to Mexico. I mean, I may be somewhat, I mean, who knows? But if we were in Mexico, would I be so much worried about an attack on the US? No. Mexico seems to enjoy a certain amount of neutrality. Granted, the border isn't going to stop radioactive stuff from, you know, air coming over, but it wouldn't be the center of their target. I hear this guy on the radio late at night from Texas, from an El Paso talk station, Jesse something, and he's He's like, don't think it can't happen. Don't think for a moment that we wouldn't see some kind of nuclear hit strike here in the United States. We've gotten so used to thinking that way, or that somehow those will be intercepted before they ever get here. Well, I'm not so sure about that either. What is it? The Chinese missiles, or the North Koreans are travel at 4,000 miles an hour. You know, they unbelievably fast. And, you know, we're just dealing with people who, like Putin. What happened to him? What happened? Something clicked. And it's not like we didn't see it coming. I mean, we saw all of those armaments being lined up on the borders there for how many months before they finally invaded. And it might have been part of Zelensky's genius to just shrug it off. He was probably preparing, but wanted the world to believe, oh, he's not going to attack. You know, what's that to us? Yeah, let him try, whatever. That might have been just part of his genius. But
someone asked me the week before of when the Olympics were still going on. One of my relatives asked me, "Do you think that Putin will attack?" And my answer was yes. I said, "You don't build up this type of force and not use it. And you know, after you put up that kind of effort, if you don't attack, someone's just going to kill you, and they're going to attack." So he would have been probably assassinated from within if he didn't follow through after going through all that effort. But my answer, though, was based on two things. When I was in the Army, right before Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and after our invasion of Panama had ended, I was an intel analyst by MOS, and I was on a little training thing. And it was this Marine sergeant. I was in the Army, but there was this Marine sergeant asked me, "So, do you think Saddam Hussein will invade Kuwait, and do you think we'll go to war over it, or we'll just let it go?" And I said, "No, I don't think they'll do it. And if they do it, I don't think we'll get involved, right?" And that's because I didn't want it to happen, not because it didn't make sense. And you know, of course, he said, "Well, you know, two things." He said, one, that's our oil. We need that oil. So if Saddam Hussein crosses into Kuwait, that affects the stability of oil. You bet we're going in, because if we don't have our oil, you know, we're going to have problems here in domestic United States. He said, so if he crosses that border, we're going in. And the second thing was, you don't build up that kind of force and not use it. He's too far along. He's beyond the point of no return. If he doesn't go in, somebody shoot him in the head and they'll go in. And the other is post-World War I Germany. You know, the economy was built in large part by military buildup. And, you know, pre-World War II Germany, you can't put all that money into military force and not use it. If you do, somebody would have shot Hitler in the head and somebody else would have done it. You know, so it was just the trend. It's just the way it was going. So it came as no surprise to me that Putin followed through and went into Ukraine. But now China has been building its military force for many years, and they've been stating for many years they expected to surpass the United States sometime around the year 2050. That's when they expected it. Now they've more than signaled. They've been planning this for several generations. So they're going to attack the United States. They already said they were going to do it. They've never hidden it. They've never hidden that from us. They said by the time 2050 comes along, we're going to be able to defeat you, and we're going to. And North Korea keeps saying that it's going to strike us. So it's going to happen. I mean, they're not hiding the fact that they're going to do it. They keep telling us they're going to do it. So it will happen. The question is, what will the United States look like after that? And I just don't want to fight North Korea. I don't want to fight China, and I don't really want to fight Putin. You know, like I kind of want to know what the other option is. What would life be like? You know, let's say Putin just got Ukraine tomorrow. You know, so suppose we wouldn't have pushed so much force in there and would have just said, look, you just go back under Russian rule for a couple of decades, and then, you know, eventually it'll become economically burdensome for Russia, and they might just let them go. You know, we didn't do anything like that. We didn't consider any of that. So I don't know, Charles. You think that if Russians land and the Chinese come here that we're gonna fight or no?
Well, I hope so. I guess I'm still enough of an American to think that I really don't want to be under either Russian or Chinese rule.
What does that mean to American, Charles? That takes, see that, I think the definition of that has changed. You know,
I don't want to be, I mean, my daily fear is that Biden is moving us peacefully towards the Chinese system. My fear is that Biden might welcome a Chinese takeover because then he wouldn't have to do what he's doing anymore. They'd do it for him. And I don't like what Biden is doing. For a long time, I kind of felt like Vladimir Putin was headed in the right direction, and I've honestly been torn apart by this war in Ukraine. I mean, on the one hand, I feel it's very sad that a gigantic country like Russia in the modern world would want to take away the sovereignty, independence, self-determination of a small country or medium-sized country. Ukraine is actually the second largest country in Europe after Russia. So it's a medium-sized country, I guess. It's larger than either France or Germany under current borders. But it seems to me that a lot of people, I don't know if you've listened to Sam Dixon talking on this show the last month or so. I mean, Sam Dixon is of the opinion that basically Putin is totally right, and that the United States has been goading him, that the United States has been provoking basically a major threat to Russian sovereignty with NATO, and basically has been doing more or less what we're talking about, poking the bear, so to speak, the Russian bear, into attacking Europe and triggering World War III. I'm not just thrilled about that, because Ukraine was until about 2 months ago a very beautiful country, and it was developing in some ways a very nice lines. Of course, when you look at the statistics, apparently it's impoverished by comparison to Russia. The very first time we did a story on Ukraine, I was looking at the gross domestic product of Ukraine, and it's like 1/20th per capita the gross domestic product of Russia. But of course, another really interesting thing about what's happening is the way the West, the international banking system that you and I love so much, has basically pulled the plug on Russia, and Russia's economy, I mean, has the value of the ruble, just for excuse me, has sunk down below a fraction of a cent, a fraction of a US cent. It was at 40 cents on the dollar about a year ago. It's now less than a cent. We did that overnight. We pulled, and this should give people a real pause about moving to a cashless society, because the value of credit fiat currency evaporated overnight, because the United States and Great Britain decided to turn off the switch to Russia. And I
No,
mean, let's
this
face it,
goes back to my education and interdependence. This is all part of it, and that is also part of the lessons that were taught in international affairs when I went to college and graduate school. But these levers aren't working, because I remember, veterans like myself who were in the class. I was enlisted before I went, but there were many officers in the class, and they were from all different countries. And anyone who had any military experience, whether they were an officer pursuing a career or enlisted like myself from the US or other countries, no soldier ever thought any of this would work, and it's not working. Okay, so they pulled that lever, and it just isn't going to make a difference. All that's going to happen is there's going to be a temporary frustration by the Russians, and they're going to get off the whole international fiat system. And basically what we did is we jump-started the idea that there'll be a separate financial system like there was during the Cold War. There was us, our bloc, and their bloc, right? So all we did right now is create the circumstance that gives the incentive necessary for, I guess we'll call it the Eastern Bloc, for lack of any other term, China.
why don't we call it Eurasia and East Asia?
Okay, so Eurasia and East Asia are going to come up with another international bloc. It's going to be a separate trading bloc. They're going to have a separate currency system, a separate finance system, and we're going to be shut out. And this is going to hurt us because, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, our oil, those countries, they're going to have the advantage because they're going to be in both systems. We can't do this. We cannot pull these levers and then shut down the Middle East, because now we're stuck with oil. And you see that Biden is struggling with this right now, and the Republicans think that the answer is, well, then we just pump U.S. oil and that'll solve the problem. And maybe it will in the short term, maybe it'll solve it in the long term, but I don't know. I don't know who to believe when it comes to the whole fuel argument. I just think that the other countries involved in this conflict are talking about global dominance, and we're talking about things like, well, we can be independent, fuel independent, and back in World War II and World War I, the conversation would been about being food independent. They're not thinking about that stuff. We're assuming that somehow we're not going to be affected militarily. We're assuming that it's just an economic thing, and we can get, we'll eventually find a way around this fuel issue, whether it's we go to electric or we pump enough oil. We're not talking about foreign tanks coming out of the big airplanes and landing in our backyards from parachutes. We're not thinking about it in those terms. We're not thinking about it in terms of a foreign military troop marching down small town USA with, driving by with a machine gun mounted on top of a Jeep and just firing into a couple of homes every now and then, like they're doing in Ukraine. We're not talking about the idea that the hospitals could be taken over by an invading force and we're not allowed to go there. So if you're an American and you get shot by the invading force, maybe your family's allowed to comfort you, but they're not allowed to take you to the emergency room. That surgeon isn't allowed to perform surgery on an American because he has to perform surgery on a Chinese soldier, or a Russian soldier. And if he tries to help an American who's wounded, he gets shot in the head. We're not thinking about it in those terms. And I really have to wonder. I don't understand what Putin gains strategically or tactically, even by holding Ukraine. Like, why would you not want the buffer zone between yourself and the enemy? Because that way, if a war takes place between the West and the East, you fight that.
Clearly, he was not worried about Ukraine as a buffer zone. He was worried about Ukraine becoming part of NATO. And, right before the invasion, I don't know if you all heard about the greatest vice president this country has ever had, making a trip to Poland and saying that she welcomed the idea of Ukraine's admission to NATO. I mean, that was basically Kamala Harris going and slapping down a glove in front of Vladimir Putin and saying, yeah, we do want to take over a country roughly the size of Mexico right on your border.
Throwing gas on the fire.
Yeah, I mean that's Kamala Harris, and that's the Biden administration. I mean, it makes you wonder. I mean, I use these words Eurasia and East Asia, and goes back to the question I asked a while ago: was 1984 a warning or was it a plan? Because those are the names of the two of the three great powers in 1984. The only thing left then is Oceania, which is the Anglo-American world. And I really wonder if they are planning to do this, because a country like Biden's America, Biden's ideal America, and China probably can only maintain power in a state of perpetual war. That was the warning of 1984. And that part of 1984 seems to be becoming very much true, at least the way I look at it. And one of the thoughts I had when the invasion started, because like I said, I'm not 100% with Sam Dixon that Putin is right. I feel very sorry for this little country being wiped off the map. And I feel very sad that the idea that there is no place for small countries in this world. I mean, I was talking earlier about secession and how I favor the idea of Hawaii seceding to prove that it can be done. But what future does Hawaii have as an independent country other than as a client state of either East Asia, Eurasia, or Oceania? There is, I mean, the Hawaiian flag already aligns itself with Oceania, I guess. It's got the Union Jack up in the corner there. I don't know, the population of China is now so heavily East Asian that maybe they'd go with China, the way their population is these days. They wouldn't want to align with us howlies. I really, really, really wonder if this is not part of a very long-term, sophisticated plan, and Putin basically pulled the trigger because it's the only way the plan can keep going.
But why? I mean, what's the point? I mean, why is it to exterminate all of us? I mean, do we breathe too much air? I mean, what is the reason? I mean, clearly.
Sean, that's exactly what I said. It's to exterminate the small countries and to, basically perfect the bloc. I mean, NATO right now is allied with us. If Putin can take over Ukraine, he'll then there will be a line between Poland as part of NATO, Poland, Hungary, and Romania are the eastern border of
Slovakia.
Well, I'm just saying that line there is the eastern border of NATO, and that's currently Oceania.
Yeah, but what's the point of controlling the whole human race? I mean, why do you want it? I mean, what can you do? What do you not have when you don't have control of the human race, and what do you gain when you do have control of the whole human race? What you get out of it? I mean, it seems to me that it's a huge burden to have to control. It's like trying to manage every leaf in the forest. Why do you want
Good analogy.
Say it.
Good analogy.
Well,
why would you want to?
You have read 1984, haven't you?
No.
Okay.
What's the why?
You can watch the movie.
Yeah, I don't want to. But why? What's the point? What? I mean, do I breathe too much air? I mean, I'm not going to be a good slave. I mean, why? What do you benefit from conquering me? Politically and economically. I mean, essentially, I'm a bird, and you're going to have to feed me. I mean, why?
According to George Bernard Shaw, in his prediction of the world socialism, anyone who is not a good slave will basically be painlessly put to death.
Okay, but why? You know, I mean, okay, let's say everybody, you got your slaves. What are you going to build with them? I mean, you're going to build pyramids, you're going to build monuments, and what would we build? What is it that has to be done? You know, I understand slavery had, you know, forget about the morality of it. Let's say, you know, it was necessary to get things done. It did build great empires, and it was necessary to harvest the fields. It was necessary, I guess, to win some wars. It was necessary to build things like pyramids. But what, you know, I mean, all that's done. I mean, we don't need to build.
What it comes down to is that no shit. I'm going to have to go in a minute here. There are competing human instincts. There are competing human instincts for freedom and for domination. And the simple truth is that I think that the human instinct for freedom is much weaker than the instinct for domination. And so the people who want to dominate others are going to come up with a plan for perpetuating domination. And the 1984 hypothesis, and as a graduate of Columbia, which is #2 in the country, you absolutely must read 1984 if you haven't already, because it says basically that those who want to dominate have figured out that the only way they can maintain perpetual domination is by splitting the world up into 3, maybe 4 entities who will constantly be at war, and that this will satisfy, basically, you might call it their satanic or maybe Satan's own
There you go.
intuition for his desire to rule the world. And it's
Okay, so the two things. One, I went to grad school at Columbia. I didn't go to undergrad there. Second, that's kind of what I was getting at. The only rationale that I could think of that could logically lead to someone deciding to take over the human race is the existence of otherworldly force like evil, you know, which I went to religious school growing up. I believe in God. I believe in hell. It's actually the manifestation of evil, the real manifestation, or somebody rationally bought into it. They don't believe in it, but you know, they kind of signed up to the ideology. But I can't think of any other reason other than evil, whether it's actually Satan or human being just choosing the path to do what I think is going to happen over the course of the next, 20, 30 years on Earth. There's no rationale, there's no productive thing that could come from it. You could argue that slavery built great aqueducts, and yes, it was cruel, yes, it was mean, but look at all those people who have water. You know, okay, so maybe this general is a monster and will burn in hell, but all those people who now have sanitation because of the water that was delivered by that slavery. You know, you could rationalize that and see the guy making that argument to St. Peter and getting in, right? But you cannot, I don't see how you could rationalize enslaving the human race now. I mean, what do? We can't build spaceships because to build spaceships, you got to be really sophisticated. You know, you can't, we're going to take all the slaves and send them to the best universities on planet Earth so they can build spaceships, time machines. What possible reason is there to control the whole human race? Unless there's are we food for another creature or something? I don't get, other than the true existence of evil, I don't see any other purpose.
There are the Georgia Guidestones.
Yeah, evil. Just if there is there any positive economic gain that come from controlling the human race of planet Earth?
Wiping out 75 to 80% of the population might be considered a positive good. But let's turn over I wanted to turn over the final words to Dan a half an hour ago. Dan, We've gotten to good and evil. This is Pastor Dan Mack's department.
Well, part of what I'm thinking is that we're supposed to be, the light of Christ to everybody. We're supposed to be little Christs, no matter what's going on out there. There's that spiritual battle, and there's that ultimate important destiny. Are you going to go to heaven, or are you going to go to hell? Do you believe in Jesus as your Savior, or have you rejected him and everything that he stands for? That kind of got left on the sidelines in all of this. I mean, it just naturally does. Becomes a more personal thing unless we all know that we're on the same page, as far as our Christian faith. But I was thinking of a guy named Lindsay, Pastor Lindsay, not Hal Lindsay, but Pastor Lindsay, that I was watching YouTube's, his story. I was watching these years ago. His story was that he somehow became a chaplain on the pipeline, the Alaskan pipeline. He became a chaplain, and as a chaplain, he was privy to board meetings that nobody else would have been privy to. They called him to, I guess the uppity ups up on the pipeline decided that too many men were suffering from depression and things. They needed a spiritual counselor. And so he was called to be this chaplain to them. And in his videos, he basically said, don't be fooled. These guys know what the price of gas is going to be 25 years from now. His point was that they control everything. They control and they plan everything. Now, I haven't seen one of his videos. I haven't looked for one of his videos for several years. But if you find him on YouTube, very interesting to listen to what he says. He was probably in his 70s or 80s when I last saw him, talking about this. So to the point of planning, or there's another moniker, you will either be impacted or you are to impact somebody else. You're either going to be impacted upon or you will be doing the impacting. That kind of falls in line with what Charles was saying. This idea between freedom or dominance. And those are my thoughts.
Well, Dan, thank you very much. We will get together again. Thank you for joining us tonight. Sean, thank you. I'm going to have to close this down right now because I've got like 3 people calling me. And anyhow, good night, everybody.
Good night. Nice to see you again, Sean.
Happy Holy Day.
Bye-bye.